Welcome everyone to our webinar today, where we are going to be discussing all things multi-site franchise. So we're going to give you a lot of overview, a lot of thoughts, a lot of questions to ask yourself. There are quite a lot of experts on the panel today, and quite a lot of content to get through. So I will introduce everyone and then we'll get started. I want you to use the chat today as an opportunity to connect with each other, chat, ask questions, and get involved. You know, often these things are kind of one way. We'd like it to be multiple ways, and get everyone involved. So we will be asking questions. If you, as a panelist or as an attendee, would like to chime in and answer other people's questions, please do. We're going to have a range of experts as advisors and specialists in franchising, as well as wonderful experts from franchise recruitment from franchise groups. So I am going to add everyone who is going to be involved today. I'm going to spotlight them for you, introduce them, and then we're going to go straight into it. I would love everyone, if you can, to answer in the chat while I'm getting everyone on. I think we've got everyone here. Please tell me if I'm missing anyone. If you could just answer in the chat what your name is, where you're from, and are you currently using multi-site franchise growth as a core strategy in your business. So if everyone wants to mute themselves, chat in the chat, and then at the end we'll have an opportunity for people to jump on and ask some questions. So who do we have with us today? We have Regan from Quest Apartments. So Regan is the franchise recruitment manager there and does a lot of work with multi-site franchise group. They're a very established group who have some really great systems in place for this, and we'll share the good, the bad, and the ugly with us. We have Susana from United Franchise Group, and really interesting as a multi-brand operation. They have lots of different brands, which she'll share with us shortly. How are they using multi-site growth as an opportunity? We've got Murray from Eden Exchange. Eden Exchange are a platform that supports franchisors in selling and growing, selling greenfield sites, selling existing franchise locations, and really looking at the strategy of franchise growth. We have Vanessa from Geotech. Geotech are a company that help organisations with planning territories, and also really looking at what their growth strategy is going to be in terms of existing locations, multi-site, and so forth. We have Belinda Fyffe from the Proven Group, and Belinda is our leadership and people and culture specialist who will be talking about the skills required to go from one to many, and the difference really that is to, you know, really having one franchise location. We have Racha from Baybridge Lawyers. Racha works with a lot of different franchise groups and really jumps in head first, I'll say, in helping them with their growth and also looking at the risks. We've got Kate Groom from Franchising, Accounting and Tax. And Kate works with franchisees, really looking at, sorry, there are so many registrations coming through right now as we speak. It's a little bit crazy. Kate works with franchisees predominantly and with franchisors to support their franchisees in ensuring they're profitable, they've got the system set up, and they really know what they're doing when it comes to their financial management. And we've got Cynthia, lucky last, from Swoop, who talks all things getting funding. We know that in franchising, a major roadblock is funding, and Swoop have a really incredible service to the market to ensure that franchises can get the funding that they need. We know that growth only comes from, you know, additional territories and sites, so it becomes very important. So thank you for listening to all of that. If everyone wants to make sure that they put their details in the chat so the conversation can get started, that would be great. Now, I am going to just remove everyone from here. Just give me one moment. And I am going to start off with Regan. And Regan, you know, we're going to talk about core strategies for multi-site franchise growth. And the strategy we're going to talk about first is around how do you grow your multi-site strategy from within? So using existing franchisees to grow.
Yeah, hi Jenny, hi everyone. Look, multi-unit growth for us is critical for our entire growth plan. So we have I think we're a little bit different to some other franchisors where our multi-unit franchisees must partner with somebody to grow, so they can't grow by themselves. To assist with that, we have a couple of different things we do, but we have an accelerator program that we've developed. So that's targeting people that work in our businesses, in the hotels, that have aspirations to be a franchisee business owner. We put them through a 12-month training program, and then so we aim to have about 8 go through a year, between 8 and 10, and then these are people that we then network amongst our franchisees so they can meet and hopefully form some great partnerships to then go into their next business together. Also, the network can join together, so we have a lot of networking functions throughout the year, so franchisees can meet with other franchisees to hopefully grow that way, or new people coming in and we'll introduce them to existing franchisees. But it's a massive part of what we do. If we didn't have it, we wouldn't be able to grow the way we do to have that multi-unit.
Thanks, Regan. So if I can ask you, so I understand the strategy is existing franchisees who are successful in their current location, partnering with managers and leaders within the current network. What sort of criteria do you look at to go, this person would be ideal to come into that program?
It's the same. So the same process, the same criteria that we look for franchisees coming in that we put through our franchise recruitment. The only thing that might be different is their financial ability. So they'll need some help with funding, but you know, they have to have that growth mindset, critical that they have that, the sales oriented, they like people. If they don't like people, then they can't be in our business. That they are willing to go into a partnership. I think a lot of people are scared of that. So to understand what a partnership is like and to be open to working through those partnerships. You don't have to have hotel experience with our, like a lot of franchise, we put the training through, but I think leading teams is really important. But when we're looking at that multi-unit, it's really for them to be open and to understand a partnership, because it can go terribly wrong at the same time.
Yeah. We're going to come back to that leadership piece. So everyone hold on to that one. Thanks for sharing that, Regan.
Thank you.
Murray, I'm going to bring you on here. One of the really interesting strategies that we've discussed is franchisors, and really a pattern in the sector where franchisors are actually looking for potential new franchisees to join who actually could be multi-site from day one. That's really the strategy. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, let's face it, finding good franchisees is not easy. Even with the right strategy, you know, you really need to be able to line up a strategy to be able to go to market, to be able to find them, and then also the whole onboarding process as well. So, you know, you need to be able to, if you find somebody who is who's already got a level of success, you want to be able to duplicate that, right? So the multi-site strategy is definitely a great way to go with that. So when a franchise network, you know, if they come to us and with a specific target for a multi-site franchisees to come on board, there's a few ways of going about that process. And you know, we've already, Regan's already been talking about the internal process where you would tap on the shoulder somebody who's already doing really well. So you know, growing existing franchisee in the multi-site, you'll review your top performers and you'll have a conversation with them and you'll say, hey, listen, have you thought about this? Because you're doing a great job here. Maybe we can upskill you a little bit there as well. But with your go-to-market strategy, you really have to go to market with a criteria that's clearly stated in that marketing. And, you know, it's obviously entrepreneurial, growth mindset, as it's already been mentioned, able to manage people, you know. So it's one thing to be able to, you know, manage your own store, but it's another thing, because when you're managing your own store, if you think about it, you're just managing a few workers. But if you're managing multi-stores, you're managing managers, and it's another level of reporting and so on that you need to have that skill set. So it's just when you're targeting and you're getting out there, you just need to make sure that you've got the right message going there. And a couple of things to consider, I think, would really be, you know, if someone coming on board, they need to sufficiently be able to run one store first before they come on as a multi-store. And it might be that there's a plan for them to move forward with that. So one location, and then they can scale from there, scale the success. And once you've, you know, sort of made the right franchisee selection, you know, I think to incorporate it like a training and development plan, like a coaching program for franchisees coming on board, it gives them a path forward where they've got a clear path of growth to follow. And I think that's really healthy within a franchise network, that they actually feel like they've got somewhere to go. They're not just locked into just, you know, one site, and, you know, they start getting bored and looking at other brands. They can actually say, no, I can grow and expand within this network, and I may not need to go beyond that. And, you know, and that helps with a bit of a plan forward with that.
Can I ask you, Murray, when franchisors are using this strategy of trying to target people who are more entrepreneurial and appropriate for that multi-site, are most of them going through that process where, okay, let's get one up and running and then we'll see how it goes? Or is it, you know, do they put milestones in place, or how do they kind of set this up without kind of, I suppose, losing the spark of the entrepreneurial person?
Yeah, it's a great question, because we come up against that. One of the biggest things is history. If they've come in and they've already run five franchises, whether it be this current one or a different one or whatever it might be, you can tell that there's a history of success there. So you're going to have a higher chance of them being successful taking on multi-sites within your network. If they've come on and they haven't had a history of success around franchising, particularly with multi-site, but maybe they've run several businesses, or they've got the ability to manage several businesses, that's going to expedite the process as well. I think it's really set in that criteria. It does narrow it down a little bit. You just can't take on every franchisee if you've got that focus. It's almost like when you're going for a master franchise for a state or another country or wherever it might be. You know, you're narrowing down to a particular skill set. So there's not as many of them out there. But I think a coaching and a growth path within your organization gives people a way forward, that you can tap someone on the shoulder and say, I think we want to reproduce what you're doing there, and would you be interested in coming on board for another site, and then you can expand from there. So it depends on the past experience, how fast you can expedite that.
No, I love that. Susana, I'm going to bring you on. Thanks, Murray. Thank you. Let's talk about multi-site, multi-brand. So do you want to maybe just give everyone a little bit of a background to UFG and the brands involved?
Yes. So United Franchise Group has 10 brands under its umbrella, originated all from the US, and then they bring the brands to Australia. The two big ones that everyone may know of is Sonorama and Fully Promoted, previously known as Embroid Me. We are very, very big on multi-site. We particularly have a lot of franchisees that own more than one territory. The big thing that we say, and we've been here doing this for now 25 years in Australia with Sonorama and just over 20 with Fully Promoted. The big thing that I've noticed is that if we are going to offer this opportunity to any of our franchisees, doubling up on what Regan and Murray said, apart from being good franchisees, they have to financially sustain themselves to be able to bring on another territory or look after another area. The other thing they need to be aware of and very, very big on is the mindset of financially, but also management and also keeping things very separate. So you may have one territory that you run, but then when you take on another territory or another area, you've got to keep them very separate. And the reason being is because it's not just in the best interest of the franchisee, it's in the best interest for the franchisor, because when they exercise their exit strategy of selling, they get better value for money keeping things separate and not, there's no confusion of, hey, this database belongs to this territory and this database belongs, and then they've just gone, well, what are you selling? There's no real value in those areas. So it's really back onto, coaching, guiding them to making sure that what's the reasons for them growing and having another area? Are they doing it just so they have that brand presence? Or are they doing it for the right financial reasons to grow themselves financially, but also to make sure that they can get a better reach to a bigger audience as well?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. There's also another type of multi-brand strategy, and I think there's actually someone on this call who might be able to talk to that, who I haven't asked, but I'm sure they'll be able to. David, have you seen people? I'm going to bring you up here. Have you seen franchisees actually own multiple brands? I think you have, from multiple different, completely unrelated brands, and how has that worked?
Yeah, Jenny, we have. There's probably been a little bit more acceptance in the food side of things. There was always that fallacy that if you owned a cafe chain, you wouldn't be able to, or franchises in the cafe space, that you wouldn't be able to own another food brand. I think there's a lot more flexibility and acceptance by franchisors these days to actually be a little bit more welcoming and acceptance of the fact that new franchisees may have other brands. And as long as it's not competing directly, I definitely would say that there's a much broader acceptance these days than say there was, 5 to 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know that there are some regional shopping centres, for example, with food courts where all of the franchise brands are actually owned by the same people. They know the local area. They've got that relationship there. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for jumping on without warning.
No problem. No problem, Jenny.
I'm going to ask Belinda to come on now. Belinda, there's been a lot of discussion already about leadership and skills. Going from one site to multi is a very different skill set. And then, 1 to 2 to 3 to, we were talking before about a franchisee who owns 89 or something similar territories, which
I know.
Is uncommon. What is it you think people need to look at from a skills and leadership perspective in order to ensure that they can make a success of it?
Yeah, great question. People who own a single franchise are often, if they're really great at that particular franchise, they've learnt the system, they understand how it works, they know their KPIs, they know all their numbers and all that kind of thing, and they can make it work. And they're usually pretty good from a people management perspective, with rostering and making sure that everyone gets what they need, but also that expectations are really clear for people. And when it's a single site, you're kind of there most of the time, or you may be. And so, it's relatively simple to see things that might be going off track pretty quickly and correct them. When you move to 2, 3, 4, 5 sites, you just physically aren't there as much as you are when there's one site. And that depends also on where those sites are. Are they in the same city, or are we talking different states? So there's lots of, from a leadership perspective, everyone is looking for, heaps of studies have been done that show that people are looking for leadership, but in Australia, they tend to be over-managed and under-led. So that's an interesting thing in itself. So management's all about systems, processes, standard operating procedures, all of those kinds of things, which you absolutely need in order to make sure that you get consistency in your brand. But it's the leadership. And what is leadership? Leadership is about emotions. It's about engaging with the person, the employee, and the customer, so that they really love your brand and your store or franchise that they're coming to, and they want to come back again. They want to do extra shifts. They want to put in the extra mile. You know, you can't buy that with procedures. You've got to earn that from an emotional perspective. And that's what most people forget about leadership. But when you start to look at people, great leaders in the past and in the present, they're usually inspiring. And people who are inspiring tap into that emotional core that we have. And what that means is then you'll be willing to put forward your extra discretionary effort that you don't have to do. You know, so that's the extra bit that people put in. They'll go the extra mile. They don't get paid any more for that. So it doesn't cost you any more, but they'll, you know, make suggestions. They'll put their hand up to be a health and safety, you know, person, that representative in the business. They'll do the extra things, you know, that you're actually after. When you're a multi-site franchisee, what you've really got to understand is you need a manager on every site that you have that understands that site inside out, that understands their people inside out, and that leads in an authentic way. That doesn't mean that they have to lead in the same way as the franchisee. In fact, if they tried to and it's not their authentic way, everyone's going to see that. So it's about having an understanding of, well, you know, what fits that current group of employees? What are they looking for? And then delivering that, but in such a way that it also delivers what the business actually needs as well. And so when we work with franchisees, we often say we're the voice of the business entity itself, which is often the empty chair at the table. And we want to work with employers and employees, because both sets of people need to be in the same canoe, paddling in the same direction in order to get to where they want to go. And that leadership piece is the key piece from our perspective. And that helps people understand their roles. It reduces confusion. It helps them see where they're going, their vision. And if your leader lives the values, then people will understand what behaviours are acceptable and which ones aren't.
Belinda, I think we can all listen to you all day long. I think
I can talk all day long.
everyone's nodding and listening, because I think ultimately, you know, it's the culture of the franchisee that really sets the tone. And you know, they can often get away with it with one store. They can use their infectious enthusiasm to get it done. Whereas when you've got the multiple and you take that person out. I remember I had a conversation with Daniel Macedi, who owns 5 Boost Juice stores. And he said, you know, as they developed, there were certain tasks that he took away from himself because he just couldn't do them anymore. And he had managers, and he was hoping that, you know, they would do it. I'm sure he's happy for me to share this because we discussed it in a public forum. And he said, you know, one of the things that he took away was actually employee recruitment. And he realised that they weren't recruiting the right people, and they weren't, you know, he couldn't replicate his enthusiasm. So he actually decided to take that role back and to actually do that piece himself, because he realised that his enthusiasm couldn't be shared. It's just interesting, you know, the role that franchisee takes is going to be different across different.
Absolutely. And that's the passion piece is what you're talking about there. And that's the thing that's really hard to replicate with managers. And I'm thinking back to Baker's Delight, who spoke at the Women in Franchising breakfast that we were at, Jenny. And she was saying, you know, they tried in the very early days, franchised out, and they expanded with managers. That was it. They didn't franchise first up. They tried to expand as a company and have managers. And it never quite worked. Those stores with managers just didn't have the sales that the other stores had. And so they ended up coming back and saying, well, let's take those people who are really wanting to buy a business but perhaps aren't as financial, and give them a franchise opportunity. We'll train them in how to do that. And that's been the success story of their business. So that's the way they've actually managed to become a multi-site, as is actually through franchising. So it's kind of the want to become a multi-site led to the franchising option. And there's often times it's very hard to duplicate an owner's enthusiasm and leadership. And so that's the role that the owner always needs to retain in a multi-site space. They need to be the enthusiasm. And you just got to look at somebody like Richard Branson to know that. So he is still the head of the company and the person that makes everyone enthused.
Belinda, thank you. Really, 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 I mean, important pieces that you've shared there. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Racha, thank you for joining us. You know, all of this is great, and you know, underpinning franchising is a lot of compliance and a lot for business, the franchisors and franchisees to think about. Can you just talk a little bit about some of the nuances and things that questions that franchisors should be asking themselves when they're going down this multi-site strategy?
I think we talked a lot about franchisees and having the right franchisee and doing the due diligence on the franchisee. I think it's important internally, if the franchisor is deciding to adopt this strategy, for them to also do the due diligence on themselves to work out whether or not they have the right strategy in place to support multi-unit franchisees. And multi-unit franchisees can take the form of, you know, expansion of territories. So, you know, multiple territories being granted, or a master franchise agreement potentially, or an area development agreement. And each of those are going to require a franchisor to provide different support to that franchisee. Supporting one franchisee operating 1 or 2 stores is significantly different to supporting a master franchisee that owns a territory, owns a state, or potentially owns a large, vast territory. So it's really important that the franchisor looks to its systems, its procedures, its operational systems that it has in place to make sure that it also is able to support that growth strategy that it wants to see from its franchisees, right? And I think that's where a lot of franchisors do fail, in that they don't do enough of that background setting and the strategy piece, you know. And sometimes, if I can say, sometimes franchisors fall into multi-site franchising by mistake. You know, they'll have a great franchisee and the franchisee puts their hand up, they want a second or third site, and before you know it, you've granted a franchisee 10 sites, but you can't quite support them. And the franchisee that owns 2 sites is different to that owns 10 sites, and their mindset is different. And so, you know, you may be a franchisee that owns 1 site may need to be micromanaged. An entrepreneur that owns a master franchise does not need to be micromanaged. And so you need to manage that as a franchisor. For a number of franchisors, we talked about, you know, Belinda talked about leadership, but leadership comes in that different forms, and you have to lead people the way they want to be led as well, right? So, and how it suits them to be led. So I think for a number of those things, the franchisor, a number of strategies that we work when I work with franchisors is, well, are you ready to go down that path? In terms of,
sorry, can I just say you? Really, really interesting question that you brought up there. What questions should franchisors ask themselves to decide, are they actually ready? Like, give us maybe 3 questions.
Yeah. So the first question is, what's the growth strategy for the franchise system? That's I think a lot of franchisors don't have a growth strategy in mind. I always like to reverse engineer everything. I always say to people, I start from the end. I want to know how you want to exit, and I'll reverse engineer it and get you there, right? And work with you guys to get you there. So what's the growth strategy for that franchise system? Okay, where do you want to get, how, and then that allows you to then put into place how you want to get there, right? And with the right support and the right resources to get there. The second part is, are you willing to invest in that multi unit franchisees? And that investment piece is a different investment. The multi-unit franchisee may not have a return on investment in the same manner as a single unit franchisee. You know, it's a long haul. And really you're thinking it through, you know, what is it exactly you're replicating your own franchise system in these little miniature versions, right? So how do you pass on that passion? How do you pass on the uniformity that makes your franchise a success, but make sure at the same time that you can have the expandability? It really is. It's a bit of a catch-22 a lot of the time, and it's a balancing act. It's balancing growth, right, with the the hunger for growth, right, with the hunger for uniformity and consistency and systems and procedures and processes, etc. Right, so it's really trying to balance that. And then probably the other one is, you know, do you have the right franchisee on board? You know, have you done enough due diligence about your franchisee? You know, we've touched on this. A single unit franchisee may not necessarily be a successful multi-site franchisee, and it's more than just the financials. You know, like what will it mean to, as an example, to grant multi-brands, to have a franchisee that holds multiple brands, whether it's within the same systems like United Franchise Group or various food chains? What will it mean for things like restraints? So, you know, what will it mean if the franchisee stops being a franchisee of McDonald's, but you can't then restrain them because they're operating another food chain, as an example. So all of these things need to be really carefully thought out.
Really great.
When you decide to go down this path.
Totally. So helpful. I think those questions, they're so helpful. Racha, can I just ask you another question? You know, and sorry to discuss a little bit the elephant in the room when we talk franchising. You know, there's a lot of discussion around control and power, and, you know, I know a lot of groups are kind of nervous that, you know, one franchisee may hold a lot of power in the group if they're multi. What are your recommendations around how people kind of think about this and ask, what should they be asking themselves? You know, are there appropriate quotas and limits on it?
It's not so much the quotas or limits, it's having the right documentation that supports the relationship, right? So it's all relationship based. And I always say to people, I draft for worst case scenario, right? So, you know, my document will have every worst case that I can possibly draft for. And hopefully it's like a marriage. No one gets into a marriage with the intention of going through a divorce, right? But if you do divorce, I'm going to pull out that piece of paper, and hopefully that piece of paper is going to be able to support my position. Okay, so things like franchisors need to consider things like step-in rights. You know, what happens if a master franchisee goes under? As an example, financially, they're no longer viable. What happens to your sub-franchisees? What happens to all of those other employees? There's all of what happens to the brand damage. That's, you know, first and foremost, forget anything else. What happens to the brand damage if you decide, you know, you've lost 10 sites or 20 sites all at once? You know, so you have an obligation, both in good faith as well, you know, to both your network as well as to yourself as a franchisor to think these things through. So your documentation, you know, you talked about the nuances, you know, the code requires certain documentation. I mean, everyone here is an expert, so everyone knows, you know, the disclosure document, the franchise agreement, etc. But really having those documents. The amount of times I've seen a franchise agreement that's been used for a single site being used for a master franchise site is I shouldn't see it, if that makes sense, because they're different. It's a different relationship. It's a different element of control. What matters in a single site may not matter on a master franchise, right? And so, and having things like development schedules and development milestones, and then holding those both parties accountable, both the franchisor as well as the master franchisee or the multi-unit franchisee, okay, and then having the documentation to be able to support the relationship. That's it comes down to what's in the documentation.
Yeah, thank you, Racha. So many really interesting points. I think you know, as we're going through this and having the discussions, what really was highlighted to me, and I'd love a hands up or some sort of reaction from the audience about if this resonates with you. But it just really, to me, it's about having the right people on your team. You know, as a franchisor, you've obviously got your skills and your strength, and sometimes your weaknesses that we all have as well, unfortunately. But it's about having those wonderful people around you who are experts and you can trust. And you know, people often ask, you know, oh, you know, should I go with this consultant or that consultant? And you know, to me, it's all about the relationships, as you said, Racha. You know, when you're choosing your experts as well, because you know, they're pretty much in your court supporting you. So thank you for sharing all of that. Cynthia, welcome. We know one of the other big, you know, the stressful moments, let's call them, in franchising is around funding. Mm-hmm. I think everyone will nod when it's about funding. You know, you've got funding for new franchisees, you've got funding existing franchisees for equipment and for expansion and, refreshing the stores and, vehicles and all sorts of different things. Can you talk for us about, with multi-site? So obviously with a multi-site, they've already got an established territory location site. So they've got some financials. When you're talking about funding, what should people be considering and use existing to an advantage, really?
Yeah, really good stuff. And I think there's a really good theme here about thought leadership, which I'll add two little bits to share, which is if you don't know how to lead yourself, then you can't lead other people. So I think leading yourself is important because you need to look after you as a priority. And I know that's quite funny because I'm talking about finance, right? And this is another big area that that I find franchisees are not spending enough time on because they're running around wearing lots of different hats, which I can see from these conversations, thinking about growth, thinking about which location, thinking about who's the next person that's going to represent my brand. So a lot of things. And another secondary theme that I found in these conversations, or what I'm hearing, is effectively similar to what the 5 C's of credit is, and which is what I'm going to touch on very lightly. You're not going to be experts, but very lightly. Here's the 5 C's for you kind of think about, which is the first one is the character. And you guys all talked about who's going to come in and represent, who are the people, who's going to be managing. And effectively, that's the same in finance, is the borrower, the character of the borrower, the credit history, the borrowing history, paying your bills, even, for example, is all kind of contributes to your character as an individual, and for your next large facility limit or increasing your limit from $50,000 or to $500,000. That all kind of takes a specific individual to go in and make those disciplinary financial decisions on making sure repayments are on time, thinking about how you're going to repay them, how are you going to grow from effectively $5,000 a month to $15,000, like 3 times X your monthly revenue. These little nuances, effectively, people are not, I find when I'm engaging with franchisees, they're not thinking about enough. They go, oh, I don't actually know anything about my marketing. Second C is collateral. Your asset, obviously the liquidity position is a big thing as well for Melinda. If you're asking for $1 million, it definitely is. Sometimes won't be unsecured, sometimes it is, but knowing that you have assets to fall back on in the event that you default or you close shop, sometimes they're not going to take security. They'll just want to know that it's available in the event that you fall back on. Capital, having working capital to provide for your next opening. So thinking about, I've got my working capital here, how do I support the next working capital? So you can't just heavily rely on debt to fund your next growth. You need to think about what other working capital necessities are there for the next 3 to 6 months. How am I going to pay my wages? How am I going to pay for the printing, for example, the website maintenance? I'm just trying to think on my feet in terms of all the other multi things that you need to pay for. But working capital is another big thing that people forget. They go, oh, I want to fund my whole working capital, but there's no money in the bank to support that either. So let's say there's only $500. And my concern is, how will you repay back that debt? Because the one thing that you have to be certain on when you're opening up effectively another site is the ability to repay back that debt, right? And so that's one thing, of course, that needs to be kind of cemented. Some people think easier, dig bigger hole by doing that. Capacity, so capacity to borrow. Lenders will use, predominantly banks as well, and non-bank lenders will use your existing financials on how well you've operated your existing one to service the increase in debt. So there needs to be some room. You can't have all your margins up tight and your expenses very close, that there's no free cash flow to actually service the debt. That's also another thing. When people were asking for $1 million, they're like, yeah, I can service it, but really, what is that number? Well, what is your free cash flow? What have you kind of put in as a margin for emergency, for a buffer? These are the last sort of kind of 4th C. And then 5th one is a condition, talking about interest rates, kind of your principal, how long you're going to pay that back for, when do you anticipate, what's your exit strategy? So hopefully, I know that is a lot to take in. I won't talk too much, but those are the 5 C's.
Great, Cynthia, that was great. So obviously someone's going multi-site, so they've got their existing business financials. That's obviously helpful. Can you just talk a little bit about, what they need to do in preparation?
Make sure you use an accountant to actually help you prepare for it. Don't take cash payments, which I have hear about quite a bit. Like, oh yeah, 50% of is at cash. Make sure things are by the books, right? Because it's going to hurt you eventually when you are wanting to apply for finance, when you're not keeping up with your bookkeeping or your accounting. Pay your ATO debt. That's a huge thing as well. You can probably sense it in the market today that the ATO is not, they're not being, I guess, as flexible as they were during COVID. They're really putting people, small business owners, I suppose, applying that pressure to pay back their debt, their tax bill. We've seen a couple of businesses already fallen through because the ATO is putting in immense pressure to pay back, forcing them into liquidations to obtain that payment back. So that's a huge thing. ATO debt. Don't skip a basket. Don't skip a quarter. Get it up. Just get it done. Outsource it, right? If it's not within your strength, then just
it sounds to me like having really clean financials in your first location, your second, your third, whatever it is that you're growing, becomes very important for the next ones. Swoop as a lender or a support, your fintech is amazing in that you work with brands to help them find the right lender, so that you're not, having all of those applications on your credit rating and, with unfortunately them being unsuccessful. So the work you're doing is really interesting. And I think you do a lot of work with brands to actually help them understand, and work with their accountants to help them understand what they need to have in place to be more successful in the lending area. So thank you. Thanks for sharing all of that. I think really great overview of what we need.
awesome.
Vanessa, I'm going to bring you on. Sorry, I'm going so fast, everyone. I think so much great content to share, and don't want to miss anything. Vanessa, you've got so much experience in franchising. Geotech really focuses on that territory planning. You see kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly of territory planning gone wrong, territory planning done really well. Can you share with us some thoughts about multi-site? What are the supports that you provide and questions you help your customers answer?
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, it's a really interesting one, because with multi-site, it always sounds really fantastic in theory, even to a lot of franchisors, but in practice, sometimes it can go really, really well, but sometimes there are pitfalls, or things can maybe not go the way that they should. So I think the first thing, or the first question to ask, and I think this has been touched on by some of the others, is really, as a franchisor, really understanding where you're heading with your brand, and is multi-site a strategy that you're going to have from the onset, or is it something that just organically happens down the track? So to provide an example of, I guess, in terms of territory planning, so what quite often happens, and something that we've seen over and over again, is in the early days of franchising, if the franchisor doesn't have a particular strategy set up, they might give away territories, if we're talking specifically about territory planning, that are really large at the beginning, because they're really excited about the brand, they're excited to get into franchising, they're excited that someone's interested and actually wants to buy a franchise. So what happens is then, a little bit at the beck and call of the franchisee, they might give away this territory that's absolutely massive, because they're so excited about, someone's buying into the brand. And that's all great, but then what can actually happen is, down the track, that can actually then prohibit growth for both the franchisor and potentially the franchisee as well. And we've seen situations before where a territory might have been given away at the start because you've got a, there's so much excitement about getting it up and running that, they could have fit 3 or 4 territories or sites within a certain area, and then there's one franchisee with one store that's servicing the entire area, and it could be a quarter of Melbourne, and they could have had a whole heap of sites or territories in that area. So that's one of the considerations. And what we have seen through some of the work that we do is one of the questions to ask is, if you have gone down a path like that, then are the territories equitable and viable? And if they're not, multi-site franchising could become an option. And we have seen that before, where it's been, I guess, a bit of a solution to help franchisor growth and franchisee growth by identifying those areas which could have had 3 or 4 sites, currently got 1, and potentially that franchisee, providing they are a gun operator, got the skills, could then potentially open another couple of stores within that territory. And then what that means is it then allows for the growth of the franchisee, the franchisor. So happy franchisee, happy franchisor, happy days.
So important. So important. I think it's really interesting because, I've been asking a lot of franchisors around what they do about territory planning, and some, do it really well. So some obviously do not. It's, once again, coming back to what Racha said about the strategy and thinking through that strategy. I think, that's, to me, one of the themes from today as well. I think there's a lot more planning that's required in the sector to avoid the pitfalls and the issues in the industry. And, it's hard to untake territory, isn't it? So you kind of need to try to at least predict the future a little bit better and use data, as you do, Vanessa, to do that. So thanks for sharing that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kate, I'm bringing you on. Your passion for franchisee profitability, I think it's completely unmatched by anyone else in this sector. Making sure that your clients and everyone around you is running a profitable business where everybody is winning. You've seen, let's call the multi-sites go very well and multi-sites not go so well. Can you give us some learnings?
Yes, thanks, Jenny, and thanks for your kind words. I have seen a lot of things. I've seen some really great outcomes with multi-unit operators over the last 30 years or so. But I've also seen some poor decisions, and in particular in the current market, I think there's, if you want to make notes, I've got 6 words. You can grab a pen and write them down. So the first thing, I think, is having franchisees understand accurately the state of the economy. So economy is the first one. Anybody who's started a business in the last probably 10 to 15 years in Australia has not seen a difficult economy. And so history, past performance is not necessarily a guide to the future, particularly in this part of the economic cycle. The second thing that we are seeing now is that franchisees need to be finance ready. That historically has been a thing they could skirt around because money was cheap and equity levels in housing were high and the economy was good. We see a lot of businesses that are sadly sometimes encouraged by their franchisors actually to pay as little as possible for their accounting work. And what that means is they are not going to be finance ready. By that I mean they can't pick up a set of financials partway through the year and have them be accurate or close enough to be able to be made accurate enough for a bank application. That used to be not an issue, but we're seeing that as more and more of an issue. So a franchisee who wants to go into multi-unit land really needs to be prepared to pay what it costs to get good, accurate, at least quarterly, thorough financial reports. And that is not a $2,000 cheap and dirty year-end wrap-up. And that is a huge issue. The next one is profit. Cynthia talked about that. If you want to go into multi-unit, you have to have profit and cash spinning off the bottom of the business. So you cannot be running your existing business with a mindset that you should take everything out of that business and put it into wherever you put it to spend it. The business has to be profitable after paying a manager a proper manager's wage, has to have the capacity to pay dividends and distributions out of the bottom line. If they don't have that, that needs to get cleaned up. The next part of it is that the business owner needs to have developed over a period of time financial acumen. I know there's been a bit of chat and there's a bit of franchise discussion that goes on about the question of, you know, trying to take all the financial responsibilities away from franchisees, but you can't learn to run a business if you don't engage with the numbers. You have to understand your numbers. You have to understand the levers that you can pull to be able to do multi-unit work well. They need to make it work in this climate, they need good forecasting. That means they need accurate data. And they need to be able to plug it into one of the forecasting tools that firms like ours use to be able to look ahead and do sensible projections. And that is not a single tab spreadsheet. It does not work that way anymore. And the last bit is that we see that one of the landmines is that franchisees often do not have the right business structure for their multi-unit aspirations. If they run their businesses well and they have the right structure, including probably what we refer to as a bucket company to park their profits in so they can build up a bank of their own in a tax efficient way, that is a very good plan. It means they've got surplus inside their business structure, not simply inside their home, where the homes become a bit fraught in terms of borrowing against it, particularly in the current market. So getting the right structure in place early, if you think that you want to head in multi-unit direction, is really important. It can be done right at the outset, and it allows franchisees to do that, talking about the separate entities and separate structures, having some finance parked in the right spot so that they have the capacity to fund their business well and pass the type of tests that Cynthia was talking about. And, you know, we agree with her about the ATO. Let's get that sorted out. If you want to be a multi-unit franchisee in this market, get your ATO debt sorted out right now. Like, you've got to get that dealt with. Do not even try if you've got ATO debt.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, Belinda, thank you. What a gem you are. Thank you. Belinda's just put all your points into the chat, which is excellent. Thanks, Kate. I'm going to bring Regan up here as well, and you stay here as well, Kate. Let's just talk about, Regan, multi-site gone wrong. Don't really want to be the doom and gloom, but I think it's the learnings from these stories that is the winner. Regan.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And Quest has been around for 35 years, so we've had a lot of learnings, and we've seen you know, a number not go great, and there's a lot of reflection from our part over the years, and that leads us to our processes and what we're tweaking and all the things that have been spoken about today, which I totally agree with. And you know, we've seen some disastrous partnerships that should never have been partners in the first place. So really, how we manage that process now, putting people together, all the things that Kate just spoke about is, you know, or all the things that we're checking. But what I can say is, we know if we stray from our process, if we stray from all the things we do, we'll have a problem. So if you're going through and you've got processes for a reason, and ATO debt is quite funny, Kate. We've just added that into our criteria. If they want to become multi-unit, we're checking all those things. We check because it can lead to not great outcomes. So, but if you stray from your process, if you know that's what you're looking for and that's what you need and you stray from it, you have a problem.
Agree totally. I went to a franchise council event last week, and there was some discussion around this. And some of the franchisors were talking about the fact that they're asking potential multi-site franchisees to submit business plans for the next site, and a lot of they're kind of not getting pushback, but they're kind of getting but I'm an own entity, why do I have to kind of do this? But putting up a couple of barriers to demonstrate the importance and, you know, that the franchisors putting on the process and a couple of obstacles in there to ensure that everyone's putting, you know, invested in the right way, I think becomes really, really important. Kate, do you have something to add to that?
I do think, well, firstly, that there are lots of reasons that they explode. In my experience, I mean, the financials is really, really important, but I would agree with Belinda that having scaffolding in place for the management and leadership skills is really important. I think in terms of the disasters that I see probably the core problem is that people don't think through the financial structure that's going to support them in their second or third unit, so they don't have that structure in place. They do think that they can get away without having a business plan and a financial plan, and you do need a financial plan. If you, in particular, you need to probably start running with financial targets and with cash flow plans that you can often get away with in the single unit, as long as you're targeting your cost of goods and your labour, let's say, the key metrics. If they're in place, it works. But that is not the case in multi-unit. It's more difficult. And so there's an extra level of financial sophistication, and franchisees do not need to have that. They need to work with somebody who does. It's actually not a core skill set for a franchise owner. It's a core skill set for financial people, and they need to work with people who can help them in that space. So that's probably underestimated, I'd say.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Kate. We do have a few minutes left, and you know, I'd love people to have an opportunity to ask questions. So feel free to put something in the chat. Feel free to reach out to everyone who is involved in the panel and other people who you've been talking to. Really, really interesting conversation, and thank you, Kevin, for your ongoing commentary in the chat. We do like people who get involved. Just want to mention a couple of things. The Franchise Council are running a multi-unit summit event in Sydney in October. I believe it's the 18th of October. So keep your eyes out for that. We are running another session next month on multi-unit franchising, focusing on getting existing franchises to take on a multi-unit. So if you're interested in being involved as a franchisor on the panel, please reach out to me. You know, always looking for great stories. So we're going to be delving into that in a lot more depth. Wanted to share with you, the Proven Group actually have a book. You know, I wasn't going to share this here, but ultimately, you know, the conversation keeps coming back to people and teams and happy teams. So we have a book which Carmel Brown, the director, has written, which is Less Headaches, Happier Team, More Success. So you can order that on the website. I've just put in the link, and you can actually order, you know, franchisees can order it too. So that's something that we've got, which is available to the sector. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I would love it, Carmel is on the webinar, yes. I would love it if you could leave a word or two in the comments to just give us a bit of a vibe of, you know, some of the key takeaways for you. What did you find most interesting about the session? So as I said, the next session, which I'll email everyone about, is on expanding your multi-units with your existing franchisees. And there are a couple of core strategies there. We're going to be getting further into that selection process and the criteria that you're putting in place and what to be asking and the systems involved. So thank you, everyone, for joining. Really, really appreciate your time. Really enjoyed having the conversation and looking forward to seeing you all next time. Thank you.